Discover the incredible journey of a grandma who transformed pain into amazing, motivational rev. Betty stood in her living room, staring at the peeling wallpaper that had once been vibrant, now reduced to muted colors that matched her dwindling spirit. Just weeks ago, news of her grandson Ethan's school closure due to budget cuts had rattled their small, Midwestern town. Her heart churned as she helplessly watched him navigate the world with fragile health and unsettling anxiety. The glimmer of hope that once illuminated her role filled with passion was now dimmed, replaced with the fear of an uncertain future. Every creak of the old house felt heavy, a weight amplified by the whispers of the community, suggesting there were burdens, unwilling to see the love that sparkled within their struggles. "If only you could contribute more," they said. As a yesterday's educator turned caregiver, the sting of their judgment stung fiercely. She reflected on her dreams, the ambition to inspire students, yet the reality of her life now seemed a cruel joke against those aspirations. Tension rose as she rummaged through dusty boxes, searching for traces of her younger self. A memory triggered, her poetry, golden words that had once flowed from her soul with a purpose now forgotten. Fingers trembling over the yellowed pages, she recalled the lessons she imparted, the lives she touched, and how they, too, were entangled in a world that often judged them. An idea blossomed, fragile yet defined, a poetry reading fundraiser to help save Ethan's school. It filled her with both dread and determination. But doubt came rushing in like a cold tide. Was she too old, too irrelevant? The insecurity twisted her insides, each thought echoing louder than the last. What do I have to offer? Conversations replayed in her mind, laden with derision. A former student from years past emerged in her thoughts, a recipient of her teaching now rising to undermine her with pointed critiques. She's just a grandma trying to relive the glory days. Thoughts of embarrassment coiled tightly within, threatening to strangle her resolve. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The walls inside her swirled with anxiety, a suffocating mix of desperation and a burning desire to reclaim her identity. Gathering support for the fundraiser was daunting. Each phone call was a gamble with her fears, rejection pouring down like unrelenting rain. But behind her eyes flickered a fierce fire, igniting something she thought had long been extinguished. Sifting through a heap of emotions, she felt a pulsing defiance simmering within. An urge thrived to stand apart from the naysayers. The day of the poetry reading loomed ahead, a daunting shadow settling on her heart. She felt hunted by her insecurities, each step she took reverberating with the weight of judgment, breathing life into her fears. Confronting memories of her former student gnawed at her resolve, a piercing reminder of her past success twisting into betrayal. As she tucked the poems into her bag, her resolve solidified into a palpable tension, faced now with the crumbling facade of both herself and her aspirations. As the clock ticked down, Grandma Betty felt the full weight of the impending performance. Would she embrace her path, standing tall against doubt, or dissolve like the flowers wilting in the fall? The voices of the past echoed in her ears, supporters and critics alike, as she crafted her final decision, teetering on the precipice of courage and uncertainty, a potent blend of trepidation and tenacity setting the stage for the next chapter of her life. Betty stood at the foot of the stage, surrounded by the quiet rustling of chairs and soft murmurs of the audience settling in. She gripped her notes, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm, each beat a reminder of her trepidation. The last remnants of doubt clawed at her, whispering insidiously that she was merely an imposter in a world that had moved on without her. Yet, beneath that turmoil, a flicker of defiance fought for breath, pushing her to rise above the cacophony of dissent. She took a deep, unsteady breath, scanning the small gathering of familiar faces, friends, former colleagues, and a handful of students. Ethan sat front and center, his eyes wide with expectation, and that made it feel real, a tangible reason for this endeavor. With their encouragement etched into her thoughts, she stepped forward, allowing the lights to wash over her. The microphone felt strange in her grasp, a cold metal reminder of the distance between who she was and who she aspired to be. Her voice broke momentarily as she began. The words poured out tentatively at first, trembling like autumn leaves caught in a gentle breeze, but each verse grew stronger, imbued with the weight of her experiences. The poems were her lifelines, the verses that had once shaped her students' minds now turned into vessels of her vulnerability. They spoke of loss, love, and resilience, weaving together the fabric of her journey, from accomplished educator to a caregiver shrouded in uncertainty. With every stanza shared, she felt the judgment melt away, replaced by understanding. She noted the glistening in Ethan's eyes, his belief that she could still transform and inspire sparked something profound within her. Halfway through, her confidence swelled, buoyed by applause that resonated beyond mere sound. She could feel the connection in the room, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared struggles and victories. The weight on her shoulders lightened, allowing the lighter side of humor to emerge naturally within her poetry, invoking chuckles that she had thought lost to her. But just as the warmth surged through her, the familiar face of her former student stuck in her mind. Behind the supportive murmurs, she could almost hear the sneer disguised as critique, the whispered doubts that had plagued her. Would they still haunt her, robbing her of the triumph she felt in that moment? Determined not to let it fester, she decided to confront it. Directly addressing the audience, she confessed that fear often loomed larger than the actual moments that define us. Confidence, she proclaimed, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand tall despite it. The room erupted into a spontaneous applause, and her heart soared, buoyed by the recognition that this was her transformation, not one measured by accolades but by the courage to return to her roots and share her voice once again. As the last poem wrapped echoes of hope around the walls, she realized she was on a journey of rediscovery, not just for her grandson's future but for her own spirit. As she stepped off the stage, an unexpected wave of exhilaration washed over her. It felt so liberating to reclaim a part of herself that had laid dormant for too long. The applause still resonated in her ears when the whispers of doubt crept back in, clawing at her mind. What would happen after the reading? Would the courage she'd mustered persist in the face of new challenges? Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from Ethan read, "You were amazing, Grandma. But what are you going to do next?" In that moment, Betty realized that this was merely the beginning, an invitation to continue forging her path. With a newfound fire, she pondered her next steps. She could feel it in her bones. An exciting uncertainty awaited her, one she was determined to meet head-on. But would she rise to the occasion, or would the crushing weight of outside expectations strike again? The next chapter of her journey beckoned, filled with promise yet shadowed by apprehension. How would she navigate this landscape of self-discovery and rediscovery? As the questions loomed, she signed off with a contented smile, knowing she would come back to confront whatever lay ahead. Betty stepped outside into the cool night air, the applause still reverberating in her ears, a distant echo that lingered in her heart. The soft glow of the street lamps illuminated her path, and for the first time in so long, each step felt purposeful. Each breath filled her with a sense of accomplishment that transcended the fear and self-doubt she had been grappling with. But with that exhilaration came a new weight. The questions Ethan had posed lingered in her mind like shadows. What was next? A desire to explore this newfound courage pulsed within her, urging her forward while simultaneously tethering her to the fears that had held her back for so long. A few blocks down, she reached a small cafe that had become her refuge during her darkest days. As she stepped inside, the warm aroma of coffee wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. She found her usual corner table, situated next to a window. The world outside bustled on, oblivious to the quiet revolution taking place within her. Sipping her coffee, Betty pulled out her notebook, a lined page filled with thoughts and gibberish mixed with poetic intentions. Wasn't that the essence of growth? To turn unexplained chaos into something meaningful. She stared at the empty page, urging herself to write, but the words felt trapped. The blank canvas mirrored her uncertainty about what lay ahead. Sometimes the hardest part of the journey is knowing where to go next, she mused aloud, unaware of the young barista pouring lattes nearby. His head turned slightly, curiosity flickering momentarily in his eyes. He probably didn't realize how profound the truth in her statement was. Flipping through her past musings, a thematic thread began to emerge: resilience, connection, hope. What if she turned her recent experiences into workshops? The thought electrified her. This was not only about sharing her poetry but also about creating a safe space for others to share their own stories. Betty grabbed her phone and began typing. Bringing your voice to life, a poetry workshop, the header read, her fingers dancing deftly across the screen. Moments later, the anxiety swirled again. Would anyone want to come? Would she attract the very judgment she feared? The whispers of her former students' critique returned like an unwelcome ghost. Shaking her head, she realized she had just confronted this fear. Her transformation wasn't defined by others but by her willingness to embrace vulnerability and authenticity. Each negative thought she crossed out felt like a victory. She wasn't erasing doubt but choosing to redefine her path. Confidence doesn't come from being fearless, she reminded herself, echoing her earlier revelation. It's cultivated through action. She knows that now. With renewed determination, she clicked send. The email flew into the digital ether like a bird freeing itself from a cage. As Betty stared out at the night sky, a chill swept through her, a reminder that uncertainty and discomfort, while unsettling, were part of her journey. It served as fuel for her growth. A thought nudged her: fear could be a companion on this adventure, not a hindrance. Tension hung in the air as she pondered this new landscape of personal exploration. Could her next steps embrace the fear, turning it into something powerful? With her heart racing, she pulled her notebook closer, jotting down reflections and ideas that bounced in her mind. What about writing a blog to document this journey? Sharing her workshops could create a network, a community, even if that community was just a handful of seekers like herself. The more she wrote, the more pieced together her path forward began to feel. Yet, with each notion came the fears of overextending herself, of failing to live up to her own aspirations. Was she truly ready to offer herself so openly? The weight of the decision pressed on her, inviting her to confront it head-on. The time had come to face the whispers of doubt, not as threats, but as stepping stones. And as the cafe buzzed with quiet conversations and clinking cups, Betty realized she stood on the precipice of something extraordinary. The next chapter awaited her, its face cloaked in uncertainty, but armed with her voice, she felt ready to embrace whatever came next. The next morning brought with it a haze of determined focus as Betty awoke with a fresh sense of purpose. The sunlight streamed through her curtains, illuminating the cluttered corners of her small apartment, echoing the turbulence within her mind. Today, she knew, would not be like previous days. She brewed her coffee, heart racing at the thought of diving deeper into her workshop plan and blog idea. Sipping her drink, she pored over her last night's jottings. The ideas floated before her, vivid and tantalizing, but still tangled with threads of anxiety. Her fingers traced the table's surface, contemplating how to transform her concept into concrete action. The stinging memories of self-critique clawed at her mind, whispering reminders of past failures. But this time, instead of retreating, she confronted these thoughts head-on. Betty pulled out her notebook, its pages crammed with dreams, half-formed ideas, and the occasional doubt. Each line she wrote held potential, a mirror reflecting her journey thus far. She began drafting her first blog entry, detailing her experiences with vulnerability. The words flowed, raw and authentic. As she typed, she found herself revisiting the painful critiques that had once paralyzed her, facing them as old ghosts rather than inevitable futures. Embracing your voice means facing the fear of being unheard, she penned. That was it. Writing about her path would surmount the self-imposed limitations tethering her. Her fingers hesitated over the keys for just a moment, an internal tug-of-war waged within her. With a deep breath, she pressed publish on her first blog post. Instantly, a surge of exhilaration coursed through her veins, eclipsing the familiar shadows of doubt. The act of releasing her thoughts into the world had transformed her fear into a tool for empowerment. But, as quickly as that triumph washed over her, a new wave of anxiety surged. What if no one read it? What if she was pouring her heart into a void? Betty paced her small living room, wrestling with the habitual anxiety that threatened her composure. She remembered the barista's fleeting curiosity, the spark of intrigue in his eyes from last night. Perhaps others could connect with her journey just as she did, looking for threads of solace in the patchwork of vulnerable narratives. A sudden resolve brought her back to her notebook. A workshop would need an invitation, a call to engage others. She began brainstorming potential participants, developing outreach messages. Who in her circles had shared similar struggles? That evening, she returned to the cafe, its familiarity now a backdrop to her growing ambitions. The barista noticed her and offered a friendly smile, igniting an unexpected impulse of fleeting camaraderie, one born not of fear, but of authenticity. "Hey, I've got a new project I'm launching," she found herself saying. The words stumbled out, taking her by surprise. "It's about bringing people together through poetry." To her shock, the barista leaned in, interested. "Sounds amazing," he replied, enthusiasm brightening his features. "Are you looking for help? I can spread the word." Betty's heart leapt. Here was someone willing to support her shadowed fears. Their conversation flowed easily, ideas exchanged naturally, and for the first time, she felt propelled by the possibility. There were other individual tales, perspectives waiting to be woven into her own. But as the cafe began to empty, doubts crept back in. What if she couldn't manage the expectations she had set for herself? The weight of responsibility pressed down like an anchor. Later that evening, she jotted down her feelings again, her pen moving urgently over the page. How could she balance the vulnerability of sharing her journey while managing her own self-expectations? As she wrote, a flicker of insight sparked. Transparency could be her greatest strength, not just in her sessions but in how she approached her own limitations. "Maybe this is just the beginning," she wrote, "and revealing my imperfections could inspire others to do the same." The thought settled her heart, reshaping her apprehensions into a source of creative energy. As she prepared to close her notebook, a text buzzed through from an old friend inquiring about her recent endeavors. It ignited a flicker of hope and determination in her, a sense that reaching out could forge unexpected connections. Yet, with each new step, the darkness of doubt remained prevalent, now intertwined with the thrill of potential. The complexities of her aspirations taunted her, laced with the possibility of not living up to them. Tomorrow loomed with opportunities and challenges, a threshold beckoning her. Could she collectively draw strength from her anxieties and show others they weren't alone? Betty stood at the edge of her dreams, recognizing the weight of the risks involved in her own transformation. And as she looked toward the horizon of her life, the question loomed larger than ever: would she face the fears that could hold her back or find strength within those very shadows? In the cool night air, she felt a pulse, a growing awareness that the next steps would require more than just courage. They required the commitment to remain authentic amidst vulnerability. The true journey was only beginning. The next morning, the sun broke through the remnants of doubt that had accumulated overnight. Betty rose early, invigorated by a sense of purpose that felt both foreign and exhilarating. Today was the day she would take her workshop from concept to reality. As she brewed her coffee, the steam curled upward in a way that mirrored her aspirations, reaching higher, striving for clarity. Sitting at her table, the notebook lay open before her, pages filled with plans and sketches of potential activities. Each line pulsed with possibility, daring her to act. This morning, she resolved to build a structure around her workshop that wouldn't just invite participation, but foster genuine connection. She flipped to a fresh page, jotting headers, topics, structure, engagement methods. As she crafted the framework, memories of her previous failures lingered at the edges of her consciousness, attempting to cast a shadow over her progress. "Focus on what you can control," she whispered to herself, employing a technique she had read about, the mantra of empowerment. She chose to confront her nagging self-doubt rather than succumb to its clutches. With each mark of her pen, she embedded her renewed resolve deeper into her aspirations. Outside, the vibrant energy of the neighborhood began to bustle, sounds of laughter, distant music, the chatter of people breathing life into the world. Betty recognized that she, too, could add her voice to this cacophony. Feeling the pulse of community, she grabbed her phone, a spark igniting her thoughts. The barista's enthusiasm still lingered in her mind, perhaps he could help amplify her vision. She crafted a message, inviting him to a meeting to discuss promotional ideas. "Can't wait to see our ideas bloom," she typed, heart racing at the prospect of collaboration. This was new territory, reaching out for help, sharing her dream, risking potential rejection yet again. Yet, the thrill of possibility outweighed the fear lurking in her mind. After a quick breakfast, she donned a crisp outfit, feeling the shift in her demeanor as she prepared for the day. She had an appointment with a local art center to see if they could host her workshop. Each step felt charged with intention as she walked there, the city unfolding around her like the covers of a narrative waiting to be written. Upon entering the arts center, Betty's confidence flickered like a candle in the wind. The space was bright and inviting, adorned with vibrant artwork that spoke of stories untold. A woman at the front desk greeted her warmly, and Betty felt a spark of warmth ignite within. Betty sat with the center's director, a poised woman exuding an air of both authority and kindness. As she pitched her concept, she leaned into her passion, allowing the authenticity of her vision to cascade forth. She described her aim of using poetry to create a safe space where vulnerability could flourish. Each word dripped with earnestness, the essence of her purpose manifesting in the air between them. But even as her confidence mounted, a familiar trepidation seeped in. What if it all collapsed? Would she have the strength to navigate this world of expectations? As these thoughts swirled, she paced along the periphery of the room. It suddenly struck her the very act of sharing her discomforts with her readers had already begun to reshape her relationship with vulnerability. Perhaps the key lay in embracing uncertainty. The director sat thoughtfully considering her proposal, making notes on a pad. "Your idea is refreshing," she finally said, her voice steady. "People need spaces to express themselves. I'd love to support this." Betty felt a rush of relief, validation felt like a bomb on her anxious heart. Leaving the arts center, the spring in her step was buoyed by a wave of optimism. Betty couldn't shake the feeling that this collaboration could not just launch her workshop but serve as the cornerstone for something grander. Still, as she returned home, doubts clung to her thoughts like fog. What if success brought expectations she could not meet? The fear of inadequacy loomed as a dark cloud over her aspiration. Yet, the echo of her blog post lingered: vulnerability is strength. Could she manage her own fears when faced with this nascent mission? That night, as she prepared for bed, she reflected on her day. Each step had pushed her closer to her dreams, yet each moment was shadowed by uncertainty. She opened her notebook once again, scribbling down the day's experiences and her emotional oscillations, both jubilant and trepidatious. The journey ahead remained daunting, but perhaps it also held the key to a deeper understanding of herself. Would her unveiling of truths catalyze her growth, or would the weight of expectations pull her under? With the last stroke of her pen, a new notion settled in her mind: what if embracing this ambiguity became the narrative of her journey? Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, but it would also hold the potential for revelation. And as Betty turned off her light, the questions loomed larger than the shadows of her fears, waiting for answers she was yet to uncover. The following morning, renewed by yesterday's small victories yet burdened by lingering doubts, Betty sank deeper into her thoughts. The rising sun illuminated her kitchen, but the brightness could not dispel the shadows clouding her mind. With a steaming mug in hand, she sat at the table, surrounded by her carefully arranged notes and potential workshop outlines. What if the workshop flopped? What if participants didn't connect with her vision, or worse, left feeling more isolated than when they arrived? No amount of preparation seemed to shield her from these harsh projections. Still, there was no turning back. Today marked a critical step in externalizing her dreams, pushing her from the confines of her imagination into action. She had scheduled a brainstorming session with the barista, a collaborative venture she hoped would solidify her vision for the workshop's promotional strategy. This day represented more than mere planning, it represented hope. Stepping into the coffee shop, a smile broke across her face at the unapologetic aroma of roasted beans mixed with sweet pastries. It felt familiar yet different. There was now a purpose guiding her. As she spotted him, reading a book while waiting, her heart raced a little at the thought of sharing herself, her dreams, her project with someone who lived in a world that felt so far removed from her own. "Hey," she greeted, shaking off the nerves that threatened to envelop her. His engaging smile transformed her anxiety into an electrifying excitement. They grabbed a cozy table and soon dived into discussion. Betty laid out her ideas, the essence of her workshop flowing from her lips. She felt the way her words danced in the air, buoyed by encouragement. The barista, who had immediately resonated with her enthusiasm, provided insights that delighted her, a few suggestions about social media posts and community bulletin boards that made her realize the potential of every corner, every channel available. With each strategic idea exchanged, Betty's confidence began to swell. The interaction sparked something within her that she had feared lost, the realization that collaboration could amplify her vision, nurture growth, and simultaneously confront her fears. The weight of her goals, which had previously felt isolating, began to shift and transform, becoming shared aspirations rather than burdensome expectations. Yet, as they mapped out her next steps, a question surged within her thoughts. Would her authenticity withstand scrutiny? The very vulnerabilities she sought to celebrate through poetry were also part of her rawest fears. She would present her unrefined self to strangers, any rejection would feel like a piercing wound. After their meeting, a resolve crystallized around her. In the days to come, perhaps she should intentionally reach out to more people, friends, peers, even critics. Could she brave suggestions, both positive and negative? Perhaps the act of inviting others into her world would dissolve the singular burdens of judgment, inviting instead a collective understanding of vulnerability. With her notebook filled with new ideas and pathways to explore, she left the cafe invigorated but anxious. The fear clung to her, but she understood it might be a necessary companion to growth. Embracing discomfort could become less scary when shared, less problematic when rooted in meaningful connection. Later that evening, as Betty sat down to chronicle her day, she felt the weight settle within her chest, a mix of excitement and dread. The journey was far from linear, each moment unearthed emotions and reflections that would shape her into the workshop as architect, the conductor of hearts and minds. But a thought remained, burrowing deep into her mind: how far could she truly go if she continued dancing around her fears? What untapped potential lurked within her, waiting to be unleashed? Tomorrow loomed large with opportunities for revelation and challenge, and Betty sensed the stakes were rising. Would she be ready to confront whatever came next? Betty awoke with a start, the soft morning light filtering into her room, wrapping her in a gentle embrace that felt almost comforting yet persistent. Today was the day she would pop the final piece into place for her workshop planning. She could no longer afford to operate under a veil of self-doubt. If she wanted to create an inviting atmosphere where authenticity reigned and connections blossomed, she needed to show up completely vulnerably and boldly. Determined to ground herself, Betty spent her morning in a quiet meditation. The process felt foreign yet familiar, each breath reminding her of her capability. She pictured the participants. Their faces, eager to share, to connect, and possibly, to heal. Every inhalation filled her lungs with empowerment, every exhalation released fear. By the time she finished, she felt lighter, yet aware that this was just the beginning of her work. After breakfast, she glanced at her notebook, pages filled with ideas and sketches for her workshop flow. Her initial excitement about the integration of poetry into discussions was being transformed into a real plan. She picked up her pen, ready to draft emails to her friends and family, the very people whose feedback she had once feared. Would they be able to guide her journey? Each line she wrote felt like carving stones of insights that once felt daunting into something tangible. The first email she sent was to Clara, a local poet and friend. Clara was known for her penetrating insights and unabashed candidness. Betty hesitated for a moment before hitting send. The vulnerability unwrapped some concealed shame, an apprehension that lingered after their last encounter, a conversation where Betty had expressed hesitation about her worth as a facilitator. With each response she sent, she could sense her resolve solidifying. As the clock ticked toward noon, her phone buzzed repeatedly. Excitement rang through her being as feedback started trickling in. Clara's email was a mix of admiration and constructive suggestions, pushing Betty to think beyond her original thoughts. It sparked the realization that growth doesn't reside solely in isolation, rather, it emerges from a symbiotic exchange of ideas and reflections. By the afternoon, she had initiated conversations with several friends, each more invigorating than the last. Their discussions ranged from how she could present themes of vulnerability to inviting them to contribute a brief reading of their own poetry. Ideas collided and evolved into something greater than Betty could have conceived alone. Yet, despite the waves of encouragement, a nagging concern persisted: was she truly ready to expose her own vulnerabilities, her own raw poetry, to an audience of strangers? Sitting at her dining table, her thoughts drifted back to the images of the first gathering. Who would attend? Would they be engaged or reserved? The unknown felt frightening. But then, a powerful realization: this very uncertainty represented the quintessence of her workshop. It wasn't just about reciting poetry, it was about nurturing a community where everyone could confront fear, embrace vulnerability, and engage with one another. As the day dissolved into evening, Betty felt a rush of clarity wash over her. The act of sharing wasn't just challenging, it was transformative. Each participant's story could intertwine with hers through poetry, creating a tapestry of human experience that could embolden every voice present. Just as she began to draft her welcome speech for the workshop, a knock interrupted her stream of consciousness. With a quick glance at the door, she felt a jolt of anxiety but also curiosity. What awaited her at the threshold? More importantly, would this encounter offer her further insights or validate the storm of doubt still lurking beneath her newfound optimism? Opening the door would reveal more than just a visitor, it could usher in unforeseen challenges or even crucial revelations she wasn't prepared for. As Betty opened the door, her heart raced, caught between anticipation and fear. Standing there was Gus, an old friend from college, with whom she had lost touch over the years. He was holding a large bouquet of wildflowers, vibrant and untamed, reminiscent of their carefree days filled with spontaneous adventures and deep conversations. Betty. It's been ages. He exclaimed, his eyes shining with genuine warmth. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, instantly filling the room with his contagious energy. Her nerves began to settle, yet an unfamiliar tension surfaced. Seeing an old friend, someone who had once shared her ambitions and creative passions, sparked a sense of nostalgia that both comforted and unsettled her. "Hi, Gus. It's good to see you," she managed, forcing a smile as she accepted the flowers. Holding them felt oddly symbolic, like holding onto a part of herself from a past she had almost forgotten. She was grateful for the reprieve, but a knot of self-awareness tightened in her gut. "What's new? Still writing?" he asked, glancing around the room. His enthusiasm was disarming, yet it added fuel to her simmering anxiety about her workshop. Her secret dreams of being a facilitator felt fragile beside his expectation of her creative prowess. Well, I'm planning a poetry workshop actually," she replied, uncertain. The words stumbled out unfiltered. Gus's expression shifted from curiosity to admiration, his interest palpable. "That's amazing. Poetry has a way of reaching deep into people's souls," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. She nodded, feeling an odd thrill but still questioning her own conviction. It hadn't been so long since she'd been paralyzed by self-doubt, and the internal struggle swimming in her head whispered that Gus's enthusiasm might set her further adrift. But what if no one shows up? Or worse, what if they show up and think my work is unworthy? Gus stepped closer, sensing her conflict. "Hey, don't sell yourself short. You've always had a way with words. Remember how our late-night brainstorming sessions used to flow like magic?" His words stirred a tempest inside her. They illuminated a truth buried in shadows. She had once been a person unafraid to share her talents, someone who inspired others. Yet now, she felt an imposter, dubious about her abilities and the ensuing workshop. She longed to connect people, to harness their stories and unite them through vulnerability, but did she have the right to take that center stage? "Maybe it's not about being perfect, but about offering a space for authenticity," Gus continued, sensing the walls she had built around her. His reminder was a bolt of clarity. She was caught up in wanting to be an ideal facilitator instead of just being herself. "Well, that is what I'm trying to do," Betty said, her voice steadying. "To create that space." But what?" He probed gently, a safe harbor amidst the chaotic storm of her thoughts. Betty hesitated, a burst of fear swelling within her. "What if I can truly connect with them? What if my own vulnerabilities aren't enough?" He looked at her with a knowing gaze, and in that moment, she saw a flicker of hope, a possibility of transformation. Maybe sharing her insecurities could be the very thing that disarmed the barriers of others. Perhaps a journey of vulnerability wasn't just a personal battle, but a shared experience. As the conversation deepened, she began to find pieces of her old self entwined with the challenges that lay ahead, pushing forward the notion of melding her past with the present. Realizing that her hesitations revealed her humanity rather than a weakness, she took a breath and acknowledged that to truly guide others, she had to be willing to stand in her own truth. Just then, the phone buzzed on the table, signaling a new message that pulled Betty's focus. She didn't recognize the number, but instinctively, she sensed this communication could alter her path. Heart racing, a mixture of fear and excitement flooded her senses as she reached for the phone. What awaited her on the other side of the screen? Would this message present an opportunity, or add another layer of uncertainty to her journey? Betty's fingers trembled slightly as she grasped the phone, its unfamiliarity sparking an uneasy curiosity. With a deep breath, she swiped the screen to reveal the message. It simply read, "I hear you're hosting a poetry workshop. I would love to join if there is still a spot available." She blinked at the screen, disbelief washing over her. Who was this person? How did they know about her plans? Each tick of the clock grew louder, echoing her burgeoning anxiety. Yet, beneath the initial shock, a flicker of excitement ignited within her. Someone wanted to join her workshop. Was it validation? An indication that perhaps she wasn't alone in her journey? What does it say? Gus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with interest. It's someone asking to join the workshop, she reported, half in awe, half in disbelief. That's great. He responded, an encouraging grin stretching across his face. And just like that, you're on your way. What are you going to do? His enthusiasm was infectious but quickly clouded by her fears. I don't even know how to respond to this. What if I screw it up? What if I can't provide what they're looking for? What if they regret their decision and leave? Panic threatened to drown the flicker of excitement, morphing it into doubt once more. Gus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You won't know unless you try, Betty. Instead of focusing on what could go wrong, why not think about what this could mean for you? For them. She met his gaze, searching for reassurance in the depths of his eyes. But what if I'm not enough? You are enough. You've got passion, creativity, and a unique voice. You're not alone in this, he said, as if sensing the shadows inching back into her thoughts. She let out a slow, steady breath and began to compose a response. The act of typing felt like a small victory against the tide of doubt that had threatened her for so long. Hi. Yes, there is a spot available. The words danced across the screen, electrifying her nerves with each keystroke. She concluded the message with her email and clicked send, feeling a rush of adrenaline. What had just been an abstract idea of leading a workshop was blossoming into reality. See? Not so scary, Gus encouraged, his smile mirroring her inner shift. You're taking steps forward. Easy for you to say. I still have so much to prepare. Her enthusiasm was a mere ember, struggling not to flicker out. What if I'm not prepared enough when they show up? Preparation is part of the journey, Gus replied thoughtfully. You won't have everything ironed out till you dive in. You need to embrace the process. Think about the moments that have shaped your passion for poetry. What do you want to share? As his words washed over her, Betty found herself reflecting on her own motivations. The thread of poetry in her life hadn't merely been about art, it had been a lifeline, a way to express herself when words failed her. She had poured her heart into every written piece, finding solace in rhythm and rhyme. Suddenly, the workshop began to take on a renewed significance. It wasn't just a performance, it was an invitation to share her journey and to understand the journeys of others. Yeah, I guess. A sense of clarity broke through her remaining doubts. I want to create a space where storytelling flows, where participants feel safe enough to bare their souls, just like I did. Exactly. Gus cheered. And the first step is owning your story. You might be surprised by how many feel the same way. As the conversation continued, Betty shared ideas and concepts for the workshop, recalling moments where sharing had opened gateways to understanding and connection. The flicker of excitement inside her grew into a steady flame as she found her voice again during their exchange. And yet, even as she felt this burgeoning sense of purpose, another message pinged on her phone, causing an unexpected jolt. This one, too, was from an unknown number. The notification felt like a weight, a shadow looming over her newfound determination. What could this new message mean? Was it support or a challenge? Would it build upon her awakening or threaten to overshadow it entirely? Nestled in her anticipation was a potent tension, her past creeping in as she embraced her future. Uncertainty loomed large, and despite the connection with Gus, she sensed another turning point ahead, one that could either reinforce her journey or derail her aspirations altogether. Betty felt the weight of the unknown message in her hand as she stared at her phone, the anticipation tightening in her chest. With Gus beside her, the energy in her apartment crackled with possibility, yet the new message evolved from an exhilarating prospect into a palpable tension. Energized yet apprehensive, she swiped the notification open. "Hey, I heard about your poetry workshop. It's been a while since we've talked. I hope you're not too busy to include someone who has been away. Let us catch up." The message was from an old colleague, John, a man whose articulate critique still haunted her thoughts. Memories of their past conversations blended with fresh doubts, igniting a flicker of anxiety. Would he judge her intentions? Would he see her endeavors as a desperate attempt to rediscover herself rather than a genuine aspiration to uplift others? What does it say? Gus leaned in, tilting his head with curiosity. "It's from John," she said, each word curling around the uncertainty that knotted in her stomach. "He wants to join the workshop. Sounds promising." "Don't overthink it," Gus coaxed, grinning as if he could sense the tumult of emotions roiling inside her. "John's opinions used to be tough to take, I know. But he is not your boss anymore. This is your space. You have the right to lead it however you want." "You're right," she replied, but self-doubt lingered, inching back under the surface. "But will he really respect my vision? Or will he critique my every move?" Gus chuckled softly, breaking the rising tension. "It's not up to him at this point. You're the one who is stepping into the spotlight, not him. Focus on what you want to create instead of what he might think." As her heart raced, she suspectingly tapped open John's message once more. The weight of past critiques felt heavy, coating her thoughts with doubt, yet within that space, something profound began to unfold. A whisper within urged her to transform her fear into an opportunity for connection rather than a barrier against vulnerability. Taking a deep breath, she responded to John. "Hi. Of course, there is a spot available for you. It'd be great to catch up." Hitting send on the message began to lift the gloom that had wrapped around her ambitions. There was still some fear clinging to her heart, but now, within that fear, a spark of exhilaration ignited. Gus's encouragement burned brightly against her insecurities. "Look at you. Doing it. You might find that discussing your workshop with him could illuminate fresh perspectives too," he said, a teasing glint in his eyes. "Maybe," Betty acknowledged, her voice steadying. "I should view this as a chance to reconnect, not as an evaluation of my worth. I am the one designing this space." All at once, memories of the first poetry reading rolled through her mind, the laughter and connection she fostered there. It filled her with warmth and conviction. This workshop wouldn't solely be an embodiment of her past knowledge, it would channel the collective energy of everyone present, growing from their individual stories. Emboldened, Betty laid out her plans for the gathering, articulating them with newfound clarity and excitement. She created a structure that included free expression, safe sharing, and collaborative exercises to foster connection within a sphere of mutual vulnerabilities. Gus listened intently, his enthusiasm resonating her reaffirmation. "This is the moment, Betty. You're crafting a space where everyone can explore their voice, as you're doing now. Lean into that," he encouraged, his supportive manner wrapping around her doubts like a comforting embrace. Later that evening, Betty found herself moved by a profound clarity. This endeavor that once seemed a source of trepidation had turned into an invitation for growth. Each workshop participant represented a piece of a larger tapestry woven from shared experiences and poetic connections. With each passing moment, the resistance she felt lessen, revealing a vibrant anticipation for the workshop ahead. Her phone chimed again. John's response, filled with eagerness and nostalgia, brought her further relief. Scheduled for the weekend, she resolved to embrace whatever came, shared doubts or rekindling friendships with an open heart. Tomorrow, They would adorn the walls of the arts center with stories and verses, mingling their lives with poetry to explore what it meant to be human in an ever-complex world. As she prepared to sleep, a warm glow enveloped her. The workshop was no longer a fleeting fantasy but an impending journey of transformation, not just for her but for all who stepped into the space she had created. With every fiber of her being, she felt ready, a sense of purpose anchoring her. She could harness her vulnerabilities, thus inviting others to do the same, revealing their innermost fears, dreams, and poetic truths. Betty would forge a new chapter for herself and others, turning pain, uncertainty, and aspiration into heartfelt verses that embrace the beauty of shared human experience. The sun would rise, illuminating a path riddled with challenges yet filled with hope, connection, and creativity. And with that, Betty knew without doubt, this was her moment to stand tall, proud of who she was and ready to embrace the unfolding journey ahead. Now, dear viewers, if you've enjoyed watching Betty's remarkable transformation, you need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and give voice to more stories like Betty's. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Comment your reactions and theories about what you think happens next. Let's keep the conversation going.